steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB. Thanks for coming back and checking out the channel. If you're new, please consider subscribing. This is Lincoln Addict Podcast, an on-to-rise media production that I produce and co-host, host this podcast. I have other podcasts as well. And thank you again for all of the support. This episode, I think I get the numbers sometimes mixed up. I believe we're on episode 45 now. And this episode, I'm going to be a little bit lighter in content. The reason for that is I know sometimes I spend a lot of time researching things and trying to pull stuff together, and that definitely takes time. And as I've stated, I've wanted to kind of find my groove here with episodes and, just content in general. So what I'll continue to do is hopefully layer in some episodes like this one that is super important, and I'm going to cover a key safety item for 64, 65 Lincolns when we get to the main topic. And at the same time, it's going to allow for me to put out some content sprinkled in between some of possibly the longer episodes. As I always state, I want to thank Devious Customs. If I point right there to that hat, Devious Customs, they've been in business over 25 years, if my calculation is correct. And that is who I trusted for my suspension on my 64 Lincoln Continental convertible. You might be thinking, hey, I have more of a stock car, more along the lines of something that's a purist, if you will, to a certain extent, or at least in that realm. You can check out deviouscustoms.com because they also have a few products that may be something that you're interested in, such as like the window switches and things like that, kind of modernizing a little bit, but keeping the aesthetics of the 1960s Lincoln. So I think deviouscustoms.com is the place to go and at least check out if you're looking to modernize a Lincoln, whether it's a fuel pump or gauges and things like that. deviouscustoms.com has got you set. Let Jeff and team know that ODB, the Lincoln Addict, sent you. I also want to give you a huge shout out to Colorado Custom Wheels. The same wheels I have on my Lincoln, and the reason why I get behind this brand is because they are American made. I often talk about, don't just, take folks' word for it that maybe get things for free. I certainly did not. And do your research when it comes down to what you want to put on your car. I love their Lincoln replica wheels because it looks like that original wheel cover, aka hubcap, but it has a custom billet aluminum look to it, of course, because it is a billet aluminum wheel. I decided to run a 17 on my car because I wanted that look of a little bit bigger wheel cover, if you will, from the factory, which was a 15, but I had that meatier tire, a little bit, more meat on it, if you will. Of course, I wanted a wide white wall look. That's just what I like. And of course, I added that to my car with the Diamondback tires. But ColoradoCustom.com, let Michael and team know that ODB sent you. Okay, so as we jump into this episode, I want to give you a quick overview. So in this episode, we'll be shorter overall. We're going to talk about a key thing that you really should consider doing for your 64 and 65 Lincoln Continental. Now, ironically, I own both a 64 and a 65 Lincoln Continental. And this item is something that myself, John at Stinkin' Lincoln, Chris, and the entire cast of employees at Lincoln Land, and many others like Tony Bolsbolin, Blair Farmer, John Cashman, they've been talking about for years, and many of you know this item, but I don't know that someone's taken a quick moment to say, hey, this is where it's at in the owner's manual. This is what you do. Like literally, if you can get your car out of the garage, or if you've got a big enough garage and you could swing the door open, it might only take you less than 5 minutes to do what I'm going to share with you a little bit later. That could save really someone's life. It could certainly save a vehicle, but of course a life is more important. And that is a key safety item that I will cover on this episode. And it talks about the parking brake. So more on that here in just a few minutes. I also want to give a shout out to Steel Rubber. Often folks will ask me, hey, what should I use? Actually, I have a friend in the truck scene that's building a 68 Lincoln. He recently reached out and he said, yo, Jay, what products do you recommend? I hadn't got a chance to really dive into your Lincoln podcast yet because I've been over here building these crazy trucks for 20 plus years. And I said, yo, homie, you want to call Steel Rubber. Get on their website, figure out what you need. They got you covered. Best, in my opinion, best detailing products in the world. Years ago, Joey, my good friend Joey Remuto, turned me on to griots. And they're just such an awesome product. Of course, we had Nick on prior, so huge shout out to them. Okay, so just kind of moving along, Lincoln Life updates. So this one kind of falls into this category, but on one of the recent episodes, I think I kind of reinforced that, December 2024 into mid 2025, I had just really a huge project that I had been working on here at my home. And you can pretty much see it around me as I've referenced prior. Any extra time that I have, which is kind of rare these days, I spend out here, and I have been kind of just curating stuff that I so appreciate, the childhood that I grew up, whether it be some of the action figures you see above me or the Back to the Future stuff. A little bit further out of frame, I have my Lincoln stuff. So you might argue and go, yo, Jay, why aren't you recording with that in the background? Well, got my one Lincoln Road sign here my wife got me. It's just where I'm strategically placed. Without moving cars and things like that, I wouldn't really be able to have that as a background as of right now. Maybe in the future, I'll do a couple episodes over in that region, but it's taken up a bulk of my time. And I think that is my main explanation for just kind of slowing down a little bit with just things I have, dealing with family things, like in a good way. Little less reviews that I've done on Bring a Trailer and things like that. But what my goal is to continue ramping up and doing these episodes of the podcast. That was kind of like one of those updates that I wanted to put under those Lincoln Life updates. The Raddies. So on Instagram, arguably one of the coolest Lincoln accounts out there is the Rattys, the Raddies. Each year, they do what they refer to as Rat Fest. And that's like their big event. And what's been so cool over the years is continuing to see the groups come together. Richard from Suicide Slabs will often make it out. Tony from Death Row Lincolns, which is kind of his brand. Lincoln Addict. We made our trek out there. I can't believe it's been 3 years ago in 2022. I really want to go every year. It's not in the cards, in terms of time and things like that for me. But you also have Suicide Kings, the big club in California that I believe is maybe even expanded out of that state. And we've seen other people, right? I mean, we've seen LCOC kinfolk come out there. And it's just so awesome to see so many of the Lincoln groups converge on that event. So love to continue to see that success. And there's another event coming up soon, and it's the Suicide Kings. And this one's going to be in September of 2025 as well. What you want to do is keep it posted to my Lincoln Addict account on Facebook and Instagram. I'm starting to post a little bit on TikTok. I'm not a big TikTok user. I spend probably 0 minutes a day within that world, but I realize so many people have talked about, hey, you're kind of losing out if you're at least not just getting your content over there. There's lots of people worldwide that want to consume it. So I'm kind of dabbling a little bit there, but Suicide Kings have several Instagram accounts, probably Facebook too. But if you're on Instagram, it's like Suicide Kings, CC for Car Club, I believe it is, Suicide Kings LA. One of the gentlemen that has a coupe, I think a 69 coupe, he sent me the artwork for it, but I want to give them a huge shout out. Main thing is, many of you would maybe hear this even after the fact. So the best way to get that kind of information for any car show, if you will, and anything that's kind of going to happen here in the near future is really social media. Let's face it. Love or hate social media, that's where it's at in terms of the content. Boss Bolin, so my friend, my homie, Tony, nicknamed him Boss Bolin. His last name is Bolin, and he certainly is a boss. He is having an event on October 4th, which at the time of this recording is a little less than a month away. October 4th, the Moose Lodge in the Tampa Bay area. Now, there are several. My wife is a member of the Moose, thanks to some of our friends and really actually family that have gotten us connected in. We haven't spent a lot of time at the local one here. I know Tony and his girlfriend do, but the Moose Lodge 1741 is the number. You could hypothetically just search the internet for that. The key thing is it's the North Hillsboro. So instead of the normal spelling of our county here, Hillsboro with the GH, it's Hillsboro. So it's the North Hillsboro Moose Lodge 1741. And that's in Tampa. I think it's technically West Chase, but for the most part, it's a free event, which is awesome. If you want to donate a couple of bucks, at the entry, you certainly can, but come on out. It's going to be a great time. Room for, as I understand, 50 to 100 vehicles. So we'll have to kind of see if this turns in, from an inaugural type thing into an annual. We'll have to see. But for now, it's going to be an awesome gathering, no cost, and it should be a great time. And then last but not least, from a Lincoln perspective, we are doing the Tampa Kennedy Cruise 8th annual. event on November 22nd, 2025. I had hoped to do it 2 weeks prior, like we did in 2024. And I mean, 2 weeks prior to Thanksgiving weekend. My born day is 11/23. We know, unfortunately, the day that JFK was assassinated was 11/22/63. So growing up, I always saw the content related to the assassination. I became intrigued with it, as well as the vehicle, of course, SSX, the code name for the 61, not Lehman Peterson, but the Hess and Eisenhart, I believe I sometimes will butcher that. But the 61 limo, of course, the day JFK was gunned down in Dallas. And we know Texas has been doing their cruise longer than us. I think it was a certain group out there, but there's, obviously the suicide slabs are kind of, I think, the main folks that do that cruise now. At least it seems like that way on social media. But JFK was here on 11/18/63 before he went back to Washington. Then he made the trek to Houston. Then he made the short flight to Dallas. And unfortunately, the rest is history. But we know JFK was here on 11/18/63, and he went down. I believe I always get this confused. I think it was Lafayette Street at that time, and then ultimately that was changed in honor of JFK and his visit here in 63 to Kennedy Boulevard. And it's ironic, there's actually a road that is Lincoln that runs directly into Kennedy, so can't make that stuff up. The other cool thing is at the University of Tampa, which is kind of where Kennedy runs directly downtown, you have the JFK statue, and that was placed there. And we typically will take like a group photo and whatnot. I do believe we'll continue to grow this event. This is the 8th annual, as I mentioned, the 9th annual, of course, in 2026, and then the 10th will be in 2027. I've talked to people, some pretty big names that really want to get involved, and you just have to kind of determine how big we want to make it. Thought about making it a weekend and things like that, but we're going to kind of see where it goes from there. So that'll be kind of a key thing. But if you want more information and Facebook, you can type in Tampa Kennedy Cruise. It should pop up with the 8th annual for November of 2025. I had hoped to do it 2 weekends before, and I don't know if I had mentioned this already, but 2 weekends before Thanksgiving this year, but it just didn't work out. We tried that in 2024 and it was great. However, I have something going on the 15th of November. So that pretty much landed us at needing to do it on the 22nd, which is bittersweet because that's, the day, the calendar day of the year that represents the tragic events back in 1963. Okay, so next, I want to talk about Lincoln's for sale and just kind of the general market of what we've seen. So without further ado, let me pull this up. Okay, if we look at Bring a Trailer, which is really where my barometer kind of goes, I'm going to refresh this. No, I checked this a little while ago, and the prices have kind of bounced a little bit here. But there's a 61 sedan, which is going to end in less than an hour. It's currently at 12,000. I suspect that's going to go up. And there's a Roadster 66 coupe, which is earlier was like at 72 or 74,000, I think, ish. It's at 76,500 or 76,500, which is kind of astonishing to me. Obviously, it's kind of a high-end build, but a Roadster, it's going to take a special customer to want that. The barometer, the thing I would say is this. I've heard a few people say, wow, cars are, they've been kind of selling a little bit lower than what we anticipated as far as kind of where the market's been. Now, I've had people, and I've said this before on this podcast, I've had people each year say the market is down, the market is down. And we could provide plenty of examples to show that that is not the case. I'm not a professional financial advisor by any means, so take everything with what I say with a grain of salt and as more of entertainment, if you will. But if you look at where we have come from, and as far as these prices that are still very, very high. Now, if you look at Bring a Trailer, which I'm showing now, if you're watching on YouTube, on 827, we've got a 63 sedan, 26,000. 826, this is kind of crazy. A 62 convertible, 27.5. Okay. Then you look back and you go, okay, well, A few days prior, 62 sedan, 64,000. A few days prior to that, 61 sedan, 26,200. Go back a little bit further, you've got some 65,000 and 78,000 for two convertibles. So the key thing that I would say as far as where the market's at is we do see little blips, and I can show you examples over the past like even 10 years where, cars are very, very strong, and then someone takes one to an auction and it's like, we think it's going to go for this, and it goes for some crazy low amount. And then cars that aren't even as nice go for more. There are some weird things that happen. There's no doubt about it. The thing for me is like, what's the trend? If we get to the end of 2025 and we're continue month over month seeing a downward trend, okay, yeah, then we'll talk about that. What I've seen just casually following this for a long time now is the prices continue to go up. And there's always going to be some that kind of come in at these weird, little bit lower numbers. But back in the day, you could get a sedan for $8,000, like nothing. So 26,000 still a solid number. I don't expect personally a lot of these, sedans. I don't agree that they all should be going for 30 and 40 grand. It just, 26,000 is still a lot for a sedan for one of these cars, in my opinion. So I'll be curious to continue to watch where it goes. For the people the past every year that tell me, oh, the market's down, the market's down, the market's down, I haven't seen it, because if you look at all of the numbers overall, it's still up. So that's kind of what I wanted to share there. And I will say that if you're looking for a Lincoln, you got a couple of choices. I always say call Lincoln Land first. Chris, you never know what he's got in the portfolio potentially to share, to sell. You can just look up Lincoln Land Inc., and they're in Clearwater. They've been there 40 plus years, and call that 727 number. And you can always just, there's no harm in asking, hey, Chris, it's so-and-so, or, George, or whoever answers the phone, and just kind of go, hey, do you know of any cars for sale? Do you have any for sale? I'm looking for an XYZ. Chris's prices to me have always been fair. And living here in the greater Tampa Bay area, I always felt like back in the day, if I really wanted to get a convertible and maybe I was at the right time to buy, that I could kind of go, hey, Chris, it's Jason. I want to buy a car, I want to buy a convertible. What do you got? So there's always that option. My friend John at Stinkin' Lincoln, he has been posting on social media. He's got a few really nice cars for sale. So check those out. He continues to post those. He's got a great facility up there, and some of the stuff that he's doing, and some of his partners that, help him with a few things here and there. They do really cool stuff. So tip of the cap to John. Mario out west, Lincoln Boys. Mario's constantly wheeling and dealing, selling shells of a car, rolling, quote, rolling chassis, even though they're unibody. I've seen him pretty much sell a car that's running and driving with like no sheet metal, he kind of does it all. So tip of the cap to Mario. Lincoln Boys, and a couple underscores in there, of course, on Instagram. I'm assuming he's on Facebook as well. You can find more information there. That's it for Lincolns for sale. Lincolns in TV, movies, music videos, album covers. This is the last topic that I want to cover before we'll jump into the safety item for 6465 Lincoln Continental. So let me go ahead and share this. Okay, so I may have covered this in the past, but I wanted to kind of re-bring this up. This on my screen, if you are watching on YouTube, is a postcard that I own in my collection. And there's an album cover that I'll show you. But this is the infamous quote unquote gold Lincoln and motorcycle. And I think at this time, and possibly maybe this gentleman commissioned this gentleman by the name of George W. Underwood, he is on this postcard, and he had this facility, George's Roundup, in the LBC, Long Beach, California. This was, of course, back in the day, I assume 60s or 70s. And that postcard has always been intriguing to me. And I found this car, although it's not my cup of tea, the thing I like to reinforce is at Lincoln Addict, that's one of the reasons why I started the brand, is I didn't want to just focus on, stock Lincolns or custom Lincolns or this or that. Like, I like all of the history of these cars. So whether one, unfortunately, is cut up to be in a bar, or one has been customized to this extent for whatever reason, it's part of the history of these vehicles, and I think it's cool. But not only did this gentleman have this postcard, but there's a guy, some of you may know, this wasn't in my normal purview in terms of music, but this Danny Michaels in his Rebel Playboys, I believe is how it was spun, their 1964 debut album, on the bandstand also featured this famed car. Now, what you may not know And I'm looking at my post on Lincoln Addict via Instagram. And if you ever look at some of the captions on Facebook or Instagram, I put a lot of time into this stuff. And I'll often go and quote something. And basically, it kind of says in this first quote on the album, or the album On the Bandstand at 64 was credited to Danny Michaels and the Rebel Playboys. And it kind of talks about, and they decided to picture the group on the cover with George's showpiece, Gold Lincoln and motorcycle. So I do believe the gentleman that I just mentioned, he owned both of these two items. And if you look at the background here, it almost looks like there is a freeway behind it in California, but it almost looks like it's in the back parking lot with some of the plants there, maybe even taken in the kind of the same area. Of course, there's not a line on the parking lot in the one image, but still kind of cool. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of, I don't know how to say his name, Nuta, and last name is Kotyarenko. He's known as short, now this isn't any derogatory thing, as Nudie Cohen, Nudie, and then Kohn, or Nudie Cohen Design. Now, again, this was not anything that I was ever into kind of growing up in terms of stuff. I was never into like Western stuff. It just wasn't my thing. A lot of my uncles watched Western films and stuff, but he lived from 1902 to 1984, and he was a Ukrainian-born tailor who became famous in America for his decorative rhinestone-covered suits, which was kind of cool. So you can see some of these images. Now, I own this album, and I was able to acquire the album with the signatures of the band, which I think is super cool. So I'll try to maybe overlay that here. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and roll into some of my thoughts relating to 6465, really something that you want to do on your Lincoln Continental, whether it's a sedan or a convertible. This could potentially save an accident or more in the future. So let's jump right into this topic. So in this main topic, what I really want to reinforce is this: 6465 Lincoln Continental. In social media and on this podcast, I've always talked about don't leave these cars idling without your foot on the brake. And I try to say it like that because you could be sitting in the car talking to a friend without your foot on the brake, and this could still happen. Now, obviously, if you're in the car, you're going to kind of, boom, put your foot on the brake right away. But many of you know that these cars are known to kind of, quote, fall into reverse, right? So when the car is in park, you've got your shift lever all the way up in park. The steering column bushing on these vehicles, 61 and up, 66, 67, little bit different stories. Still will run into it. People will argue, is it mostly 64, 65? Yeah, probably. But we've seen it in 61 and 62 and 63 as well. So I'm just going to say 61 through the end of the decade. Okay. People will chime in and go, hey, I had a 72 such and such that did the same thing. Absolutely. It also includes other Fords. I've had a few people chime in to go, hey, it's happened in another OEM that I had. Certainly, 100%. But the way the steering column was set up is you have this tube and you have this bushing, and that bushing on these Lincolns would wear out. Okay. And what would happen is these cars, if they're idling, or like with my 65, we haven't taken the steering column out and rebuilt it yet. If I'm backing up and I kind of go over the little dip before I get into my driveway, the car will go from reverse and it will fall into neutral, like easy. Like sometimes I'll actually hold it in reverse as I'm backing up. But what will happen with these cars is if you're not in them and you're like, hey, I'm going to do a quick video on my car for Instagram or for Bring a Trailer, you'll leave the car running potentially, and you're doing what I refer to as a walk around. And if that car is idling and it falls, if you will, into reverse, well, the car's going to take off until it hits something. Now, some of you might go, wow, I've heard of that. I've never seen it. Probably not going to happen to me. Literally, when I was at the Lincoln Continental Owners Club meet in June, late June, my wife and I flew up. I talked to one of the homies there that I had met through social media, and he goes, yo, Jay, it literally, like, he goes, this is my car. And I go, oh, yeah. So I put two and two together. That was his Instagram name. He has a blue 64, just like mine, convertible. Literally, I had seen, I don't know, weeks or months earlier, his car was idling. It falls into reverse. It backs up, and it ends up hitting, I believe it was a fence, and it kind of crashed through and it stalled out, thankfully. And he was like, thankfully, like everything was okay. But he goes, dude, like it happened. And that was literally just a couple months ago. So the odds and chances of this happening are certainly there. Now, I know what you're thinking, like, well, hey, why are you kind of reinforcing all that? Well, number one, that's a PSA, public service announcement, okay? But here's the key thing. When John, Lincoln, and all of the other folks I mentioned, when we kind of reinforce this, we'll often just kind of go, hey, with a big swath, we'll say it's all of the 60s Lincolns. And arguably it is. 64, 65 have a special feature, convenience feature. And what that is, when these cars are what people will often say, they'll say, well, hey, Jay, I've got an easy solution for that. I've got a 64 Lincoln. Put the parking brake on. Well, any logical person would go, well, yeah, that's a good idea. If your parking brake works, put your parking brake on and problem solved. Car's warming up, family's getting ready to come out. I'm going to go ahead and do my walk around video now. No, not so fast. Okay. When John at Stinkin' Lincoln was on, probably maybe the first time and possibly even the second time I've had him on the podcast, we talked about in 64, 65, and this is what I'm going to actually show you on this video. In those years, there is a convenience feature that if you're sitting in your car and your car is running, and let's say you've just got in your car and you're getting ready to take off and you start the car, instead of having to reach down, believe it or not, there is a lever in 64, 65 and hit that lever. Or I think in most cases, you're probably, if you don't know where it's at, you're probably going to have to open the door and kind of look under the dash. But as a convenience to not having to do that, Lincoln implemented a situation where that if you shift the car from park to drive, you're going to see in the owner's manual, it talks about the L or the R. So like even the low gear or R for reverse. When you shift from park into a different gear, there is a vacuum release, and that vacuum release pops off if it's working, which it is in my car and it is in most cars, unless you have a crazy vacuum leak or some other weird thing. When you shift out of park into, let's say, reverse, boom, your parking brake pops off. Okay. 64, 65. The challenge with that is if that car's idling and it falls into reverse and you're waiting on your fam or you're waiting on your buddy or you're at the car show and you're letting the car warm up because you guys are getting ready to head home, the car can and will jump, if you will, fall rather is what I like to kind of say. It'll fall from, or let's say, it's in park, car's idling, it's going to fall into reverse. Well, when it does that, it's going to click off via the vacuum release, the parking brake, and then the car is just going to start rolling backwards. Okay. It can hit somebody. I've had examples of people telling me, I don't want to give all the specifics, but a car back in the 80s just falling into reverse, going across the street and slamming into a brick building and things like that. So what I want to do is show you in the owner's manual. Oftentimes, I think the owner's manuals are overlooked because they may not just be included with the sale of a car, or you might just think, yeah, it's the owner's manual, whoop-de-doo, what is that going to really tell me? Well, specifically in 65, I'm going to show you where it says in there. Then what I'm going to do is go on my 65 real time and show you how to disconnect the vacuum release. At Stinkin' Lincoln has talked about this, and many other folks have. We've always mentioned it. But what I want to do is show you how to do it. It takes less than 10 seconds. The hardest part is kind of getting in place depending on your age. I've been doing this stuff a long time. So it's like, as the older I get, it's like, trying to get up underneath the dash. Not as easy, right, as you get older, but certainly that's the hardest part. If you take a flathead screwdriver, when you go to get into position and you're able to get that, screwdriver in place, you can easily pry that vacuum line off. And what I would recommend, I even talked to Tony about this, is don't just pry off the vacuum line. Go ahead and plug it with something. That way, just in the event, you're not going to have a vacuum leak anywhere else. Like my car, for instance, has the tilt steering column. That's a vacuum release as well. So you don't want to have like a vacuum leak, but certainly if you disconnect that, you won't have to worry about the parking brake popping off, and that is a huge thing on 64, 65. Now, my understanding, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe in 64 was added as a convenience feature. They kept it for 65. There's definitely changes in 66. I do not believe that it's in the 1, 2s, and 3s, and the 6 and 7s and up. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. So you could argue possibly in those years, again, somebody would have to chime in. Maybe you could leave the parking brake on and it would be fine. But here's my words of wisdom as I close, and we'll jump into the video that I'm about to record. Just don't leave these cars idling. My 64, the steering column is more solid than it probably was brand new, and I still just don't trust it. I know it's fine, and I know it's on this car, it's not going to fall into reverse, but why risk it? The worst case scenario you're doing is you're using your starter one more time. You're just going to turn the car off and do what you got to do and then start the car again. But it's not the end of the world. With that being said, I've talked enough. Thank you for all the support to Devious Customs, Colorado Customs, Guriot's Garage, and Steel Rubber. Can't thank you guys enough. Let's jump into this quick video. It's not very long. Stay on the rise, everyone, and thank you for all the support. ODB, the Lincoln Addict, we out of here. Peace. All right, as I said, what I want to do is I want to cover this briefly to kind of show you guys what to do in the example of 6465. Now, don't mind these speaker wires. They go to these kick panels, and that's kind of on my to-do list to get all this stuff buttoned up here in the near future. But in the owner's manual, they mention something that you may not be aware of, and it's this little lever right here. And what the thought process is, in 64, they went to a situation where that if this parking brake is on and the car shifts into gear, the thought process is this is a feature that is convenient. And you could argue, yeah, it is, but the challenge is if these cars fall into reverse, which again, that they're known to do, where if the car was idling right now and if the car was on and it was idling and I wasn't in the car with my foot on the brake, because of the steering columns, again, it's not just a Lincoln thing, there were other Fords, and I believe other people have chimed in, some of the other OEMs technically ran into this challenge as well. If this shift deal falls into reverse, which is the next gear, well, the car is shifting out of reverse, or excuse me, shifting on a park. So what's going to happen is this parking brake is going to pop off, okay? So what you can do in 6465 is you can remove the vacuum release for the parking brake. I'm going to show you how to do that. In addition, so you would say, well, wow, what if I still need to use the parking brake and you're telling me to disconnect it for safety reasons? Well, in the, again, owner's manual, what it talks about is this lever right here. So I'm going to show you. All right, so I'm going to show you how to take the parking brake off, which is, again, in the owner's manual. Now, this little guy here, I need to bend the tabs on the back to get it to stay on. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it here because it will kind of fly off when I push this. But you're going to hear some of the vacuum in a second. But if you push this lever, 6465, it pops that parking brake. So if you have a 6465, there's really no reason for you to have the vacuum release set up on here. You want to disconnect it. And again, the reason for that is people will often say, well, Jason, I know you talk about these cars falling into reverse. If I've got the parking brake on, I'm good. That is not correct, especially on 6465, because when the car shifts from park to any gear, including reverse, it pops this via a feature, okay? Via an option, or not an option, but, you know, basically a convenience feature, which is really a safety concern. The other thing would be, imagine if this car was idling, even back in the day, and you had a little kid that was sitting in the car, and let's say the steering column was brand new and the car was brand new, and someone just happened to lean over, or a child were to hit the shift lever, and it went into gear, and the parking brake was on, what's going to happen? The parking brake's going to pop off, like I just showed you. It is going to be tight in here. So again, we've got the parking brake right here. And if we look, we can see on the right side, right there, try to zoom, or at least right there, that is the vacuum release. You want to disconnect that. It's that simple. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to record why I was doing it, but if you look on the right there, it took me less than 5 seconds. The hardest part is just getting on the floor and getting in position with your body. And what you do is you essentially just take a flathead screwdriver, if yours is still connected, and you're gonna put it up here against that little guy, and you're just gonna work that little vacuum line off. Now, if you want to, you can put a plug on that so that there's no vacuum leak overall. But at the end of the day, that's what you want to do. And although I've got the battery disconnected right now, essentially, if this car now was idling and we shifted it into gear, the parking brake is not going to pop off because the vacuum is disconnected. So that vacuum release, that feature, if you will, that convenience feature, is now removed. And if you still needed to use this, I'm in Florida, it's very flat. I do use this occasionally, but depending on where you're at, let's say you're parking on a hill or, you know, whatever your situation is, and you have to use this, of course, you would just then use 6465, this lever, and you would pop it. So there you go. Go do it on your 6465. Okay, not all these vehicles that are sold, of course, come with the owner's manual. You can typically find these via the usual suspect spots where you would call for Lincoln stuff or look. I don't know if these are reprinted, but for 65, it's kind of unique. I've never really talked about this. You get a little bit different layout. 64 was more of a little bit different size, and this is more of a landscape versus kind of an up and down, you know, square rectangle, which 64 was more like this. But it's often forgotten about, I think, at how valuable these owner's manuals can be. And I was taking a look at this the other day, and I want to show you guys something. If we go to page 13, you're going to look down here and you're going to see parking brakes, and it's going to say to go to page 20. Now, this one is kind of thrashed out of my Lincoln stuff. This is one of the things that's in a little, you know, not the best condition, and it's obviously, you know, the binding has kind of come apart. But if we go to page 20, right here, it's parking brakes. We often say parking brake with no S, but the parking brakes are automatically released when the engine is started and the transmission selector lever is placed in either drive position, L, or reverse. So the low gear or reverse. The parking brake can also be released. This is the key thing I'm going to show you. And it's in bold. It can also be released by pressing downward on a trip lever located near the upper end of the parking brake pedal arm. You might read that and go, trip, like I was thinking trip odometer, right? But it is a trip lever. The lever must be released, used to release the parking brakes when the engine is not running. You can also use it when the engine is running. So that's the moral of the story.
Welcome to LA where the players play, and we ride on them things